Twice in television history, a network has quietly pulled a clip that had already been seen by millions. This is one of them. Here is what they didn't want you to keep watching. Twice, in the recorded history of American daytime television, a clip has been officially posted by a major network and then quietly removed within 72 hours. Not because it was inappropriate, not because it contained an error, not because a legal department flagged a rights issue, but because the people it made uncomfortable had enough proximity to power to make a phone call. This is the story of the second time that happened. The clip ran for 61 hours before it disappeared. In those 61 hours, it was viewed 14 million times. The number of people who downloaded it before it was pulled is not known precisely. The number who shared it to personal pages, text threads, and private groups before the deletion is also not known. What is known is that the clip still exists, in fragments and in full, distributed across platforms and personal hard drives in the way that things exist when the internet has decided that something deserves to survive, whether or not it is convenient. What is also known is this. The woman at the center of it asked, after the deletion, that her name be used. She had been advised not to. She used it anyway. Her name was Gloria Hendricks. She was 64 years old. She had been a licensed home health aide in the state of Georgia for 19 years. And what she said on that stage, on a Wednesday afternoon in October of 2022, was the truest thing she knew. And it cost her something to say it, and she said it anyway. And 14 million people saw it before someone decided they shouldn't. She had not come to Family Feud to say it. She had come because her daughter, Shanice, 38, had submitted the application the previous spring as a birthday gift, a thing the family could do together. Gloria and Shanice's husband, DeMarco, 41, and Gloria's brother Howard, 61, and Gloria's youngest, Marcus, 32. They had driven from Valdosta, Georgia, 7 hours the night before, stayed in a comfort inn off the interstate, eaten a breakfast that Howard described as ambitious and Marcus described as a mistake, and arrived at the studio at 7:15 in the morning as instructed, in their matching burgundy shirts that Shanice had ordered from a custom printing website and which had arrived 2 days before the taping with a slight color discrepancy that only Shanice could see and that she had decided not to mention to anyone. Gloria had worked a shift the day before the taping, a 12-hour shift, her standard, caring for an 81-year-old man named Theodore in his home in Valdosta. A man she had cared for 5 days a week for the past 3 years. A man who called her by the wrong name approximately 30% of the time due to his advancing dementia, and whom she corrected gently each time. A man whose daughter in Atlanta called once a week to check in, and whose son in Phoenix called once a month, and who had not visited in 11 months. A man who had told Gloria, on a Tuesday in August, when his mind was clearer than usual, that she was the only person who talked to him like he was still a person. She had driven home from that shift, packed her bag, slept 4 hours, and driven to Atlanta. She had not told any of this to the segment producer during the pre-show brief. She was not a woman who led with complaint. She had been leading without complaint for a long time. 19 years of it, specifically, since the morning she had taken the certification course that gave her the credential that gave her the work that had paid her children's school supplies and her car note and her mother's medication in the last years of her mother's life, and her own rent on the apartment on Fern Street where she had lived for 11 years. 19 years at a rate that had started at $9 an hour and had, over nearly 2 decades of incremental change, reached $14.50. Not because she wasn't good, she was excellent. Her supervisors had told her this consistently. Her clients' families had told her this. Theodore had told her this on the Tuesday when his mind was clear. Because the system that set her rate had not been designed with the idea that excellence in this work was a thing that should cost more. She had a second job. She had held a second job for 6 of the past 19 years, cleaning office buildings 2 nights a week from 9 to midnight for a janitorial service that paid her $11 an hour in cash, and which she had not reported on her taxes during the first 2 years because she had not understood she was required to, which had created a problem with the IRS in 2019 that had taken 14 months and a legal aid clinic and a document she still did not fully understand to resolve. The resolution had cost her $4,300 in back taxes and fees. She had paid it in installments of $217 a month. She had finished paying it in March of 2021. She had not told her children about the IRS matter, not Shanice, not Marcus. She had managed it in the space between her shifts, in the hours when she was driving from Theodore's house to the office building, in the phone calls to the legal aid clinic that she made from her car in parking lots so no one could hear. She had told them she was handling some paperwork. This was the lie she allowed herself. Not a lie exactly, but a container, a way of describing something true in a way that removed its weight from other people's shoulders and kept it on hers, where she had decided it belonged. The Hendricks family played 3 rounds of Family Feud, with the specific joy of people who have earned a day off and intend to spend every second of it. Howard was fast and wrong in ways that were immediately, catastrophically funny. He answered a question about things you find in a doctor's office with a fish tank, which was number 1 on the board with 47 points, and which Steve Harvey spent 45 seconds reacting to while Howard stood with his arms raised like a man who had expected nothing less. DeMarco was methodical and occasionally brilliant. Marcus buzzed in on instinct, Shanice on strategy. And between them, they covered the board in a way that made the other family, the Calloway family from Montgomery, Alabama, work harder than they had expected to. The Hendricks won the first 2 rounds. The third round was closer. Going into the conversation segment before Fast Money, they were ahead by 212 points. Steve sat with Gloria. He asked how long she had been doing her work. She said, 19 years. He said, "What is it? What do you do?" She said, "I take care of people who can't take care of themselves anymore." He said, "At home?" She said, "In their homes." "So they can stay in their homes?" She said, "Most people want to stay in their homes." He said, "Yes, ma'am." He said, "What does a day look like?" She described it the way she always described it when someone asked, which was not often. Clearly and without self-pity, the way you describe a landscape you know by heart. She described Theodore. She described the medication schedule and the mobility assistance and the meals and the conversation. The particular work of the conversation, which she said was the part that people didn't always account for. That being with someone who is lonely and declining and losing their grip on the sequence of days is its own kind of labor. A labor of attention, of staying present in the room with someone who is disappearing in slow increments, of saying their name back to them so they know they are still a person who has a name. The studio fell completely silent. Steve was quiet for a moment. He said, "And what do they pay you for this?" Gloria looked at him. She was 64 years old, and she had the face of a woman who had answered hard questions simply for a long time. She said, $14.50 an hour. The audience made a sound, not words, a sound, the sound of a number landing somewhere it wasn't expected. Steve said, $14.50. She said, "Yes." He said, "An hour." She said, "Yes." He said, "For 19 years." She looked at him steadily. She said, "The work doesn't pay what it costs." She said it without anger, not performing patience, actually patient. The way you are patient with a fact that you have lived with long enough that the outrage has settled into something quieter and more durable. She said, "I'm not the only one. There are a lot of us." She said, "We take care of the people that everyone loves and no one knows how to pay." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey did not speak for a long moment. He turned away from her and faced the audience and the cameras, and whatever was on the other side of the cameras. And his face was doing what it had done in the moment with Adaeze Okafor, and the moment with Walter Grimes. It was feeling something without the professional overlay, without the management, just the thing itself surfacing in the features of a man who was not trying to perform a reaction because what he was feeling was not a performance category. He turned back. He said, "Nobody should live like that." Not performing indignation, not positioning himself, saying something he meant entirely, quietly, the way you say something when it is simply undeniably true, and the only dishonest response to it would be silence. Gloria said, "A lot of people do." The studio fell completely silent again. A camera operator named Josephine said later that she had been doing this job for 11 years, and she had a habit of watching the audience when something happened on stage, because the audience's face was often more interesting than the stage, and that what she saw in the audience at that moment was something she had not seen before. People looking at each other. Not at the stage, at each other. Turning to the person next to them with an expression that was asking silently, "Did you know this? Did you know this was how it worked?" That the person who sits with your grandmother when you cannot, who manages her medications and her meals and her disappearing grip on the sequence of days, goes home at night to $14.50 an hour after 19 years of this. But Steve wasn't done. He stood. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home." He said, "I want to ask you something." He said, "If you have someone in your life, a parent, a grandparent, anyone, who is being cared for by a person like Gloria, I want you to do something this week. I want you to find out that person's name. Not the agency's name, the person's name. And I want you to say it back to them. Because Gloria just told you what that costs. Not the money, the other cost. The cost of being present with someone who is disappearing. And the least any of us can do is know the name of the person who is paying it." He stopped. He said, "And then I want you to call your representative." He said it plainly without theater. He said, "Because $14.50 after 19 years is a policy failure. And policy failures have addresses, and those addresses have phone numbers, and those phone numbers can ring." The studio fell completely silent. The Calloway family from Montgomery, Alabama, had not moved. The mother, Denise, 55, a retired school teacher who had spent the taping being a formidable and gracious competitor, raised her hand. Steve nodded. She walked to the center of the stage. She stood in front of Gloria and she said, "My mother had someone. Her name was Miss Ruthie. I never knew her last name. I am going to find out." She turned to Steve. She said, "I am calling my representative this week." She turned back to Gloria. She said, "Thank you for what you do. Not on behalf of my family, on behalf of my mother, who is gone, who was taken care of by someone like you, and who deserved for me to say this to that person while she was alive. I'm saying it now." Gloria took Denise Calloway's hand in both of hers. The studio fell completely silent for the last time. But Steve wasn't done. He announced, before the Fast Money round, that the Steve Harvey Foundation would be making an immediate contribution of $200,000 to the Caring Across Generations campaign. a national advocacy organization working toward wage equity for home health aides and domestic care workers. He said the contribution was in Gloria Hendrix's name. He said, "Not for her personally, though she deserves considerably more than this conversation has been able to give her. For the work. For the 19 years. For every Miss Ruthie whose last name someone's daughter doesn't know." The Hendrix family won fast money. They won $23,000. Howard screamed in a register that surprised everyone, including Howard. Marcus lifted his mother off the ground briefly, which she allowed while telling him firmly to put her down. Shanice cried. DeMarco did not cry but stood very still, with his arm around his wife's shoulders, in the way men stand when they are containing something carefully. Gloria smiled. The real one, not the public-facing version, but the private one. The one her children knew. The one that appeared when something that she had been patient about for a long time had finally, in some small way, been met. The clip went up Thursday evening. By Friday night, 14 million views. The comments were not the usual comments. They were lists. People listing the names of the home health aides who had cared for their parents. Miss Ruthie appeared 4 times from 4 different strangers, which meant nothing statistically and meant everything emotionally. A woman in Detroit wrote the full name of the woman who had cared for her father for 7 years and said, "Her name is Bernadette Ellis. She is 61 years old. She makes $13 an hour. Her name is Bernadette Ellis, and I want everyone to know it." The comment was shared 11,000 times. A senator's office, which senator from which state was not publicly identified, posted a brief statement saying the clip had been shared internally and that a staff member had been asked to research the current federal policy landscape on home care wages. By Saturday morning, the clip was gone. The network did not issue a statement. An anonymous source, described by one media reporter as a person with knowledge of the decision, said the removal was related to the political content of Steve's remarks. Specifically, the instruction to call representatives, which had generated complaints from several affiliated parties and created what the source described as a difficult conversation at the corporate level. The clip was not reposted. Steve Harvey did not comment publicly. His publicist said he had no statement at this time. Gloria Hendrix commented publicly. She said, in a post that was shared 300,000 times, "They can delete the video. They cannot delete what I said. It was true before the tape, and it is true after it. 1450 after 19 years. Say it out loud until it sounds as wrong as it is. 3 months after the taping, the Caring Across Generations campaign reported that the $200,000 contribution had been received and directed toward their wage equity litigation fund in 3 states. They also reported that donations to the organization had increased by 61% in the 6 weeks following the clip's appearance and removal, a phenomenon their communications director described as the Streisand effect applied to labor advocacy. A year after the taping, Gloria Hendrix was still caring for Theodore, who was 82 now, and whose mind was clearer some days than others, and who still called her by the wrong name sometimes, and whom she still corrected gently each time. Her rate had increased. Not because the system had changed, it had not changed, but because Theodore's daughter in Atlanta had watched the clip before it was deleted, and had called the agency, and had arranged to supplement Gloria's rate privately by $4 an hour, which the agency had processed as a client-directed enhancement. Gloria had been told about it on a Tuesday. She had driven home from Theodore's house that afternoon and had sat in her car in the parking lot of the Kroger on Bemis Road for a few minutes before she went inside. Not because she was upset, because she needed a moment with it before she could go be a person who was doing the rest of her day. She understood, in that parking lot, that she had been given a fragment of what she was owed. She was not confused about the fragment being a fragment. She was also not going to refuse it. She sat with it for the minutes it took to sit with it. And then she went and got her groceries, and she called Marcus on the drive home, and she did not tell him about the $4 because it was hers, and she wanted to keep it private for a while, just a small thing that belonged entirely to her, tucked into a Tuesday the way small, true things sometimes are. There are systems designed to be invisible until someone with a microphone and 14 million viewers asks a simple question about an hourly rate. And then the system is briefly, uncomfortably visible. And then someone makes a phone call. And then the clip disappears. But the number stays, 1450, after 19 years. In a country that calls this work essential and prices it otherwise, and has done so for long enough that the women doing it have learned to describe the fact without anger. Not because they are not angry, but because the anger has lived in them long enough to become something more durable and more dangerous to the people who would prefer it didn't exist. A plain sentence, said on a stage in front of 14 million people, that does not go away when the video does. Gloria Hendricks said it. 14 million people heard it. The video was deleted. The sentence remains. If this reached you, hit the like button now, because this story being seen is the whole point. Subscribe so you're here when the next one comes. And share this one specifically, today, as wide as you can. Because the clip was deleted for a reason, and the reason is the same reason you should share it.